Hello, everybody out there on BookTube. Thanks for coming. This is Margaret Pennard. Thanks for coming by my channel. I'm joined here by two lovely booktubers who read the book Precious Bane by Mary Webb with me this week, last 2 weeks. And for some of it's a read, for some of it's a reread. And so we were just going to go through some discussion about that for March of the Moderns. So I thought I'd give you both, Toni and Marissa, a chance to say hello and introduce yourself and mention your channel.
I can start then. Hello, I'm Toni. My channel is called Booktext, and I love modern writing. I love women writers, and so that's primarily what I like to talk about on that channel.
Yeah. And hi, everyone. I'm Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. And yeah, I also enjoy modernism. I haven't gotten too much into it, but I've really enjoyed Forster lately. And I was really excited to read Precious Bane with Toni and Margaret.
Very cool. And I just put my comment in the wrong place, so I'm going to...
We see it now.
Catch up.
Yeah, I got a little distracted by your comment.
I'm trying to put your channel name out so that it's like in the chat.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And send. Cool. So yeah, we thought about doing this a couple months ago, and time came up, and of course sailed right through it, in my case anyway. This is my first time reading it, and I actually got this copy. I like to hear about how certain stories find their way to people's doors. So I just chanced upon this and was like, rural Wales, 19th century, yes. So that's pretty much all it took to jump into my hands at my local bookstore. What about you guys? Do you remember how it came into your hands?
Yeah, actually, this was a gift for my birthday a very long time ago. I think I was in high school, early high school, and I read it, and I definitely didn't understand it. I knew it was written in the 1920s because it says so on the cover, but then I also knew it took place in the 1800s, and I somehow couldn't reconcile the two, and was just very confused by the entire book. But rereading it was wonderful because of that. Obviously, I gained a lot from this reading experience as opposed to last time. I barely remembered anything from this one.
Oh, interesting. All right. How about you, Toni?
So yeah, what I think is funniest about this is that I own both copies that you guys have shown, because I forgot that I already had one of them.
Oh.
The title and the kind of synopsis on the back intrigued me both times, and so I was like, I need this book. And what's sad is that I even have an app on my phone where I keep track of all the books that I own. And whenever I'm out looking for books, I always check to make sure, but I was certain that I didn't have the book already. So I just came across this. This is the one that I read, but I do have the copy that Marissa has with the woodcut illustrations. Were you pulling it up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's a really beautiful copy. Let me find, I have a few favorites. Let me see if I can find them quickly. I should have posted them, made it easier to find. Well, here's a really nice one that's just kind of a full page landscape. Yeah. That's a great one. There's one with the dragonfly, which I quite like, if I'll ever find it.
The scene where she's with Kester and they find the dragonfly, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I passed it. You guys can keep talking. I'll just hold up random woodcuts.
Yeah, while you're looking for that. I think those illustrations really add to the feeling of an older book, right? That it's vintage, right? Because it has these 1920s illustrations.
Oh, nice.
Ooh.
Yeah, it gives it a very vintage vibe. And I would say even earlier than 1920s. It gives it a vibe more of the Victorian era.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of the books that I would find on my grandmother's shelves, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Very
nice. Oh, things pop up. How exciting.
Yeah. Never heard of Precious Bane, Martial Monarchs. Great idea. Yeah.
Well, apparently I hadn't heard of it twice, so there with you. Highly recommend it though. It was very different from what I was expecting, I think, from a 1920s book.
What I was thinking about earlier today is that it's funny because we're reading it 2021 is written in 1924 and it's about 1820. So it's like 3 different 100-year, well,
yeah,
100-year stretch, like different spots. And how if we're thinking back to when it was published, we would expect a certain thing, but when it was published, she was really not writing for the time. It feels like she's really just sort of wistfully sort of bringing us back to another time. So.
Yeah, it was a little hard to figure out the context that she wanted it in, right? Because I was 100 years away from her, and then she was 100 years away from her topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of ways it felt really timeless. You can actually date when it's supposed to take place. They talk about the Corn Laws, they talk about 1815, and so it feels very specific, but at the same time, it feels very far away and very timeless in another way.
Certain, yeah.
I find that traditions in the country last much longer, and so that's the same reason why even a modern setting in the country will feel older and more gentle and more sort of the earth, that feeling.
Yeah.
I love this book.
Yeah, and it also has all of these sort of supernatural elements and the folklore and the fantasy sort of, well, not fantasy really, but more folklore elements to it that add to that sense of just spanning different times and honestly different genres too.
Interesting. Okay, I want to hear about the genre comment. I actually looked up a Shropshire dialect accent to see like what that would come across as on YouTube, and I saw a guy who's giving his best example, and I thought, oh, I didn't know Shropshire was like one of the Welsh borderlands, so it actually could be considered Wales. And I thought, oh, okay. So I watched that again. Yeah.
And I listened to an audiobook recording right while I was reading. I find that helps me to stay on track when I'm reading kind of classics, because my mind wants to wander if it's kind of slow, and hearing it, I'm going to fall behind if I don't keep reading. But he read it, and of course it's written in the dialect, right? So it's kind of phonetical, not perfectly, but I got a lot more out of it from what he was saying, because suddenly it sounded like a word that I might know, but it wasn't spelt like that. And so that helped me to kind of hear the region, the folklore aspect to it, and then of course the historical or kind of gothic even tones, so that I really enjoyed listening to it. And it was just a LibriVox recording.
Yeah, I tried listening to it. You sent us a link. I couldn't figure out how to speed it up, and he was talking so slowly. So it didn't. Yeah, it didn't work for me. But I did listen to a little bit, a very little bit.
Me too.
But what that really helped me was his 2-3. And I was like, okay, so they're saying about 2 or 3, which is, we do have kind of terms like that in our modern dialects that we might not realize that they're kind of funny.
Yeah.
Because it was what, TUTHRE. I was like, tuthry? What's a tuthry? Oh, he was like 2-3. It's a 2-3 miles away, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're mixing a couple.
Yeah.
There's a lot in here that I kind of glossed over like that because it was, and it was almost like reading kind of in a different language, but not really, because you understood almost everything, but there were just some little regional, I'm going to put this down, it's changing the screen. There are some like regional differences that really stand out. And then sometimes you would be halfway through the book and suddenly one word would click and you've been reading it this entire time and you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's what happened to me with the OOF. I don't know if you, that's what I thought. It's like oof, but I don't know. Kester says it a lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just assumed it was oof, like oof, as an exclamation.
Yeah, I kind of decided it was a kind of like of at the end.
Maybe he uses it.
I'll try and find an example.
Yeah, find an example for us.
It was really towards the end I just noticed that I was understanding it better.
Did you mark any words that you couldn't?
Oh, oot. There was oot too. O-O-T.
Or oot. Sorry, maybe it was oot. Something with two O's.
So I had a slight advantage because I studied Middle English and Old English in graduate school. And so I recognized some of the kind of weirder terms that were still lingering in my modern English is basically like Shakespearean times. So before that, when we've got Chaucer, he's obviously like the most famous from that era of the language. But there were some words or things that linger in these regional dialects, which I think is what you were saying, that it kind of, things don't change as quickly there, and the language didn't change as quickly. And so I was recognizing some of the words that they might use for also, or and some of the words that we think never change in the English language, they had older terms for them.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to look up oot real fast.
Okay. Linguistics is fascinating. I wish you would have shared this while we were reading all the little detailed words you noticed.
Well, there were so many of them.
That's true. Yeah.
I didn't want to slow you down.
Yeah. One of the things that the guy in the video pointed out was that they just like to take away syllables and just be really lazy and sort of omit sounds.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You'll get words where the vowel changes the sound for the word. So he's got like poison, and instead of poison, it's P''ison. So it's poison, you got innards. Because that's how they would say it, so that's how they wrote it. I just loved it. Yeah. You want to hear like a few lines to see if it comes across?
Yeah. Definitely.
Let's see. Her's a witch, an ugly hair-shotten witch. Maybe in the 2-3 times I'd come to Lullingford in the past they'd stared so, but then I was but a child and didna see. I could hear the old men without croaking like a lot of rooks, and one said, "Dinna drink while she's by. It'll poison your innards. Dinna look upon the bagel. Her'll put the evil eye on you. You'll dwine and dwine away." You don't really need to know what dwine means, right? It means like
yeah. That was just like listening to the audiobook too. That was great. And it has so if you've ever heard Shakespeare's original pronunciation, it sounds a lot like that because the language really shifted. Well, there was like a vowel shift shortly after the era, the beginning of modern English. And so the vowels were a lot different, just like we were hearing from you, right? That apparently didn't change for some of these outlying kind of regional languages. So apparently, I don't know if this is true to the Shropshire dialect, but oot meant anything, as in the word anything. Yeah, like ought. And could be compared to out in some other regional dialects.
Okay.
Or in particular, the oot was used in South Scots.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you go.
That helped. Okay. It's funny. Go indie now. A twisted form of pikey, and I'm not even sure what pikey is. Great accent you got to on my show. We're going to show next Friday, the 19th. Yeah, that's the next Friday. Exciting. Very cool. Okay, well, we love the accent. We love the regionalness. We love the setting. I put a backdrop that's a little nature writing, and I know Toni mentioned the birds and like I noticed all the herbs and stuff that I loved hearing about because that's like the natural setting and the country ways and the knowledge that we used to be there. I really liked seeing that. So.
Yeah, Marissa actually posed a question in our Voxer chat that I wrote down some ideas for because I thought it was really interesting. You were asking about the relationship between folklore and religion and witchcraft, which is kind of what the nature, all those natural things, the herbs and stuff, is kind of what made people think of her as supernatural. Like she was not just natural, she was supernatural. Did you want to like add anything to that question, Marissa, or kind of why did you think of that?
The reason I thought of it was because really throughout the book, there's imagery, religious imagery and discussion about Christianity, but it's intermingled with all of this, belief in witches, belief that the main character Prue is a witch because she, has a cleft lip. The belief that there's just all these little traditions and superstitions and things that are so interesting in here. And to me, it seems like, they would be at odds with religion, but they actually just exist simultaneously within the book in a really interesting way. And then you look at characters like Beguiled, they call him a wizard. And it just seems fascinating how all of those things come together in the book.
Yeah. I thought it was very strange starting out at the beginning to have just a wizard next door neighbor. And I was like, really? Like, really? In that time period? I guess it's okay for a man.
And that they liked him so much too. That the Gideon and Prue really liked him and stood up for him. In fact, in the kind of an ironic moment in the very beginning, Gideon wishes that he was Beguiled's son. And of course, that kept haunting me throughout the book as kind of events unfolded right between them. Huh. But so I actually researched witchcraft and, especially the Victorian representation of witches in Victorian literature for a presentation I gave a few years ago. I was looking at Elizabeth Gaskell's writings about, she has characters that are called witches. Lois the Witch is one of them. I think that's what it's called.
I loved Lois the Witch.
The one I read was called The Poor Clare, which is about kind of a witchy woman in the neighborhood who curses someone, but really she wished that God would punish that person. And then he did, or that person, lost a lot of things. And she became a nun, feeling bad about it, that she had brought this down on the person. So my conclusion was basically that when women were really intense or really good at something, they were considered witches. So women who were interested in science, witches. Women who were very religious, witches. In this book, there's a lot of talk of religion, and you're right that like they coexist in a really interesting way. And then Prue learns how to read and write, which was not typical for women of her class at that time, or really anyone of her class. But because she was so different, she had this extra power of being able to read and write. She was considered abnormal, supernatural, right? Above or outside of nature. So, which was interesting because she was super grounded in nature and yet was supernatural to them.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding of it was also that they viewed her that way because of her physical difference,
Right.
in addition to her, interest in reading and ability to read and write. And in some ways, I think the physical difference led to her interest in reading and writing in some ways because it kept her pretty isolated. And journaling, writing is featured prominently as a way for her to cope and to really cope with loneliness and how different she is from other people physically.
And to process how she's being treated by the different characters. And that also makes me think of another kind of discussion prompt we had contemplated about the paradox of the precious bane. And I think, Margaret, that was your question that you posed to us.
Yeah. So what I started out thinking precious bane was the premise is that she has a cleft palate, so it's going to be the bane of the story, right? But the first time that title comes up is when Prue says it about the money and the money grubbing that her brother is doing. And so you have, okay, well, what is the bane? What is the evil of this story? Is it the physical deformity that's natural, or is it the ambition and arrogance that is driving the action? And I thought that was just a really interesting preconception that I had that sort of twisted as it went on.
I don't think I even caught that. That's how it was used the first time.
Oh, every time she talks about it, she's talking about the money rather than any thing of her own.
Yeah.
Is there a moment in the beginning? For some reason, I'm remembering a moment towards the beginning where and maybe it's the only time this comes up, where she says, maybe in a conversation with her mom, that it's not, you didn't do anything wrong. It's my precious bane. I don't know if maybe I misread that, but it was very early on, and I read it last week, so I might be missing it.
I know the conversation you're talking about. I'm not sure if she used the word specifically.
Okay.
But I did think that precious bane referred to wealth and ambition and greed. The first thing I did was look up precious bane because it's a quote from Paradise Lost, which gave the book the title. And I'm not as familiar with Paradise Lost as I would like to be. So I did a little Googling, a little research. And yeah, the bane does have to do with finance, with money. But the idea of it being precious and, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that. The idea that the ambition could also be a good thing. It's the only thing that means something to this type of a person that they're describing. And so there's the whole paradox that Margaret was describing, that precious bane also refers to many other things in the text, such as, the cleft lip. And also I believe that either Nightshade or Digitalis, they're different, Digitalis, Foxglove at the end of the book is also referred to as bane in a sense. I think somebody asked, was it Wolf's bane? Yeah. And it's kind of a play on that as well.
Yeah.
That it's, sorry.
Okay, well, I'll just put it up there so that people are watching,
Yeah, but I didn't say what happened.
No, you didn't. You're fine.
Okay.
And I'll just finish the sentence with, I'm not going to spoil anything, and I'll just leave it at that. Sorry, guys.
No, I don't think it spoiled anything either. I forgot to say that before.
Where I was going to, I think.
You'll spoil the book for sure. Yeah, I thought about how, and this can apply, I think, to all the banes that are described in the book, that they have this double-edged nature to them, right? Where there is hard, horrible things happen in the book, right? There's the spoiler, right? Hard, horrible things happen, as if that doesn't happen in any book you pick up. And there are some precious things that you wouldn't want to miss if you were to take those hard things away, if that makes sense. So she had this sense of hope for her future, right, as this lady of the coveted house that they were going to live in once they had finished working. And so I think some of her, especially with her facial difference, she learned how to see the difference between social things and moral things, which was another kind of things we were tossing around discussing. Actually, I'd like to pose a question to you that I have some thoughts on that relate to this. So yeah. I'll finish my thought real fast and then I'll pose the question. But I think that the preciousness, the precious nature of her difference gave her insight into what's more important, what society sees as being good, or what her conscience says is good. Outside beauty versus inner beauty, right? Okay, so here's my question.
Okay.
It's about the Sarn Mere.
Okay.
So there's like a lake near on their property, and it comes up through the story a lot. It frequently is part of her descriptions of her, the favorite parts of the landscape that she lives in. It sometimes is dark and murky, sometimes it's covered in fog. And spoiler alert, you're going to put the spoiler alert up?
Sure.
People drown in it. Okay? Characters drown in it.
Yeah.
So what, and it immediately made me think of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, if you're familiar with that, where there's this house and a lake that reflects the house. And in the end of that short story, another spoiler, the house crumbles and falls into the lake, and the lake kind of consumes it. So did you see any kind of I don't want to say symbolism, but did Sarn Mere stand out to you at all when you were reading? Did you have any thoughts about what it could represent as part of the story?
Yeah, that's a really interesting interpretation of the lake as a reflection of the events that's going on. I didn't really see it as representing anything, the Sarn Mere, but it reminded me a lot of the Moor in Wuthering Heights. It's just this expansive backdrop, very atmospheric, and it just gives you this mood and this tone to the story. And I think it would be a very different story if it took place elsewhere. And so I don't know if it necessarily represented anything. For me, at least, that's not something I thought about. But it did definitely create an atmosphere, a mood, and it was involved in a lot of the plot, as you spoilerly mentioned earlier. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a key part of the father's funeral towards the beginning of the book, right? Like they're standing by the mirror and they're walking, or they're kind of going past the mirror. I thought that was interesting, that it's always there, setting the tone, right?
Yeah.
What I liked about the connection with the mirror was, okay, so Marissa asked about the annotations that were in my used copy,
Yes.
and one of them was like very helpful, and it was like, ding, it said deism, and I was like, oh, yes. Okay, so the power of nature coming through and sort of directing the world. So Prue has thoughts that she expresses about the play going forward and everyone having their part to play and not really having a choice about it, and that's our sort of fate, right? And you could interpret that in a religious way in terms of like the Puritans and the saved and the damned, or you could interpret that in a naturalistic way and say that, well, it's going to just roll out however it will, and that's what it's gonna be. And I really liked that. So someone, and I can't remember, I think it was Marissa, had the Jane Eyre comparison. I really liked the moment. Oh no, that's Toni?
No, that's Toni. I actually disagree with the Jane Eyre comparison, but we can talk about it.
Okay, well, I'll tell you at the moment at which I was like, oh yes, it's that moment. She was in the attic early on before she'd met Kester, and she had that like great feeling of love wash over her in the attic, and I'm like, I want to go to the attic and smell those apples, right?
Yeah.
But she had that like familiarity with nature and gave herself over to it so much that she had this comfort in feeling that she could look out and be part of this nature, right? And so to me, that felt a lot like Jane's saying something about Mother Nature doing what she could in that moment of like the echoing her voice to Rochester. I was like, that's the moment where nature sort of reaching out and providing what is just barely necessary to move the story along in the way that you want it to go. I like that moment a lot.
Yeah, you've made me think of a lot of things that I think would, like, moments from the book that would be examples of kind of nature claiming what went wrong or making right what had been wrong, which is, I think, another kind of burying, like we bury people in nature, but we bury them underground so that nature reclaims them in a way. Anyway, you just made me think of some really interesting things.
And actually,
go ahead.
Sorry, what you're talking about right now, also just kind of, so Jane Eyre, I see some similarities once I started to think about it. Obviously, you have an attic, you have a first-person narrative. There are some things that are similar, but I think if you were to compare it to any Bronte novel, I think Wuthering Heights would really be the one. There's a lot about different generations, about inheriting the problems and of previous generations, and what you were saying, the point you were saying about burying everything under the earth, that just fits really beautifully with Wuthering Heights, I think. So for me, if it was any Bronte book, it would definitely have to be most similar to Wuthering Heights. Not that anything can be really similar to Wuthering Heights, because it's so unique in its own way.
And as I defer to you as the Bronte expert of the three of us, for sure.
There are some similarities to Jane Eyre. Like I said, there's and I feel like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Surface level similarities, I think.
Yeah, but they're still there. I mean,
yeah. So this is what the back cover of my book said. First published in 1924, etc., etc. Like Jane Eyre, which I was like, really?
Is it a question?
An unforgettable portrait of a strong woman whose determined striving for a fuller life breaks the bonds of her confining world. So the characterization, I think, of Prue was that nothing really got her down. She kept going. So goes back to the mirror. Some of the characters, again, a spoiler alert, some of the characters, in fact, all of the characters that die in the mirror, right? They kill themselves in it. Except for the baby, I think, that is brought into the water. And society would be telling her, you don't really deserve to live because you are different. You have this cleft lip. You are a witch. You are, there's just the whole, she wasn't very conforming to the traditional woman's roles.
Yeah.
So she, being chaste and prim and proper and things. But she's the one of the main characters who doesn't take that route. And I can't remember what we were just talking. Oh, her characterization. Yeah, she had a lot of hope. And I think maybe that's a comparison to Jane Eyre surviving through all of those horrible circumstances of her life.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the comparison to Jane Eyre that they're trying to make does have to do with the character of Prue. In Jane's case, I mean, they both experience isolation and loneliness, and they both stick to themselves in a lot of ways. But I feel like Jane is ostracized because of very different reasons. There are class reasons involved, parentage, inheritance, those kinds of reasons. And Prue's differences are a little more on the surface, quite obviously. But it's a very different, a different vibe that I get as to the challenges they have to face. And I think that, Prue's challenges, yes, it's society's reaction to her, but it's not society's conventions themselves that she necessarily needs to combat on a daily basis. So I don't know. That's kind of how I interpret the two. I also feel like Prue is a stronger character, not mentally, but physically in a different way than Jane is. She comes across as powerful and in a way that Jane isn't. Not to say that Jane isn't powerful, because she's a wonderful character who is, but I feel like she's a little more reserved.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think maybe we can say that Mary Webb was inspired from the story of Jane Eyre, and then put her own twists on, the setting, the characters, the circumstances, the plot. Right? There's definitely.
I think it's a lazy critic.
A lazy critic.
A lot of women in the country, and she's strong. Hey, let's call it Jane Eyre and make it sell copies. Like, no. There's lots of it was closer to, I thought. And one of them was
it may have been a commercial choice too. People will think Jane Eyre.
Yeah. I mean, if she put Jane Eyre on something, I'm more likely to buy it. So just looping back here, we had a comment about haiku was. So gypsy slang that a lot of the poorer sections of the UK adapted and evolved from. Got it.
Interesting.
And I remember from today when I was looking up Shropshire dialect, apparently, so Mary Webb was from there and she knew it very well. And this is the South Shropshire dialect that she uses. But the setting that she has chosen is the North Shropshire with the lakes and whatever, because it's somewhat different in the small region. So I thought that was interesting. And then as for the title, thanks to Milton for being vague enough for Mary Webb.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like Shakespeare. Every famous speech of Shakespeare is gonna be picked over for titles sooner or later, right? All right. Let's see. Jump in with questions. I'm just gonna open up my little note thing back.
Yeah, I've got my notes open here. Marissa asked us about Prue and Gideon's relationship. I don't think we've really touched on that too much.
We haven't really touched on Gideon actually much at all.
I'm afraid of him.
Speaking of which, I was going back to the bingo board to see if
the bingo board
conversation that would pass the Bechdel test with this book. And there were tiny snippets of conversation. Everyone, woman talking with a woman. Gideon was in the conversation.
Yeah. He's domineering in a way, you might say.
Yeah. That's why this book reminds me so much of books like Wuthering Heights and just a lot of Victorian literature in a lot of ways, and Gothic literature. One of the tropes of Gothic literature is a scary patriarch, basically. And Gideon quite literally inherits that from his father and inherits everything from his father, basically.
Exactly. What was that? I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know if it would have an effect in one way or the other, and I still don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about that one.
When you posed the question in our chat, I immediately thought, what is Gideon's relationship with Prue? And I had written in my notes, slaveholder and slave.
Oh gosh. But yes, a little bit.
So the premise is that he has this really high ambition to change their social class, and in order to do that, they need to really work their farm to its extent, it's kind of upper limits, but also cut on costs, so they can't really hire a lot of people to help them do it. So he uses Prue. He's going to make her the lady of this great manor, but first she has to break herself, right? Plowing and planting and weeding and all sorts of things, right? And their mother is involved in watching the pigs, if I remember.
Yeah.
But
even though she's rheumatic and not really up to it.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
She was an interesting character. If we could talk about her for a minute too, put a pin in that, because I haven't thought about her too much, but she was interesting. So anyway, we'll come back to that. But that was my thoughts on Gideon and Prue.
Yeah. I think at first she's enticed by him, and she feels loyalty to him. She takes a vow to him to, work the farm, to better their station, and to just improve life for them. But I feel like at some point, and really at multiple points throughout the text, her faith in him wavers and wanes, and she's, a lot less interested in his ambition and his aims anymore, because his ambitions and furthering their status comes at the expense of things that matter to her. And she starts to diverge from him.
Is it at the point where she has her own love interest that starts to diverge? Because I think growing up, she likes him well enough, and in the middle, towards the middle, it says she made allowances for him, and I'm like, that's a heck of a lot of allowances. Like finding the vow to begin with, like I don't know if you guys have brothers. I have a younger brother, and it would be no contest, no, never. So yeah, she knows him so well that she forgives him for his bad qualities, I think, and I think gives the reader enough distance to see that, he's not all one or the other. He's good and bad, and she's ready to take him that way. And I think the wavering, for me, I only see it at the point of the of the crisis with the fire, when he just when he cries, and then he's just sort of a broken man after, and then like things just go downhill.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. So I first saw the wavering happen when she asks Gideon if she can hire somebody to take care of the pigs instead of the mother, because her mother is breaking her back doing it, and Prue doesn't think that that's right, and Prue doesn't think that they should live at the expense of living. I mean, if you think about it, Gideon is always living in the past or in the future. He's never living in the present, and Prue doesn't like that. And I think in a lot of ways, Gideon having the sins, eating the sins, at that point, you start to notice a change in him. It very explicitly at some point says that he changes as a person completely at that point. And yet Prue, despite, like you were saying, Margaret, despite all of these changes, all of these sins that have been introduced into his character, as we are to believe, that she still stands by him. But I think, for me at least, the entirety of the book is watching her first accept those sins, like you said, Margaret, but then slowly wavering away from them. And the fire is definitely a peak example of that.
So you guys were saying beguiledy. In my head, I was saying begildy.
Oh.
I wanted to find out what happened to him at the end, because he's the one who curses by fire and water, and I didn't see it coming, what form that would take. So that happened, then he just gets off, and I'm like, no! But I shouldn't be attached. I shouldn't be attached to revenge. That's living in the past.
But even like the pronunciation of beguiledy, has kind of religious and the kind of witchcraft feeling to it. To beguile someone is usually seen as evil, right?
Yeah. But no, beguiling is like charming. It's like charming someone to get something out of them, right?
That's one definition.
Yeah, that's, I think, one usage.
It's used in the context also of the serpent beguiling Eve in the Garden of Eden, lying to her.
Okay.
Well, that's what I thought of as to beguile.
Oh, sorry, you guys froze.
We're back
for a sec.
Can we talk about the mom?
Yeah. Then I want to talk about the looking back in time.
Okay.
I don't forget.
So I'm trying to think what we know about the mother character. So she was described as almost as kind of like a wispy figure. Like she first of all, the father was very controlling, overpowering her, and she had this kind of creepy smile, you know, that she was like not wanting to smile, but whenever she was protesting against him, which she didn't do very often to my knowledge, you know, she would kind of gently tug at him and smile and say, oh, you know, oh no, oh no. So that was the first time I met that character, right? And then she doesn't play a huge role. Definitely the children are more developed and doing a lot more independent things. So when she's watching the pigs, she's asked to watch the pigs. She complains of her rheumatism and asks to stop watching the pigs because of it. And that's shortly after that is when she is killed off, right?
Toni!
You have to warn for the spoilers.
Okay, so I saw that coming a long time before. I think it was one of the first times brother and sister talked about their goals. Prue mentioned something about, and mother, and you're bringing mother along. And he's like, yeah, I guess. And I was like, what? So that tipped me off early in terms of she was not part of his vision of the future. Mm-hmm. He was actuarial tables and going, no, I don't think there's room.
Yeah, I didn't catch on to that, but that's an incredible foreshadowing for it, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I took it to mean like, oh, she was kind of frail, so I assumed that she was just going to get sick and die, which is kind of what happened.
That's what happened. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, oh, sure, it's what happened. But it was forced. The hand was forced, right?
When you have the doctor's readout, the doctor's prescription for the mother on one page, and then the next page is, oh, and for your cow, which has the opposite ailment, you should do the foxglove. And it's like, I wonder what's going to happen here. Some of it was rather obvious. So
by that point, I figured it out. But before, I was just like, oh, mom's just frail. And like I thought she was going to die fairly early after the father did because of her fragility and how she couldn't really, I didn't see her being like a independent enough of a personality to exist without him. So I was impressed that she lasted as long as she did. This is so weird, but it reminds me of a rabbit I had as a child who would not die. You know, they don't live that long. And we had two at first, and she outlived the other one, like lived twice as long as her. And her back legs stopped working, and then her front legs stopped working. And my family finally was like, we need to put her to sleep because she won't die. And that's kind of what I felt that they were doing with this character.
Yeah, except I don't know if she wants to die.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
She was bullied into it.
Kind of.
She had the most personality when they were getting ready for a wedding. I think they were sewing a dress or something like that.
Wallpapering a room for to come back. Is it Jancis? I'm saying Jancis in my head, but I didn't listen to that name.
I think it was, yeah. And so in a kind of a really typical traditional woman's scene, she was coming to life, which I thought was kind of an interesting portrayal of that kind of character.
Yeah, because she is so passive in the presence of men, but then she has sort of her own sphere where she comes to life. That is interesting. Yeah. Something I also think is noteworthy about the mother is that she is, according to superstition, the cause of Prue's deformity and facial difference.
Yeah, you want to explain what the superstition is?
Yeah, that she looked at the hair the wrong way or something, right?
It's that a hair crossed her path, and it's
Yeah.
the devil in the form of a hair that spooked her when she was pregnant.
Yeah. So
and she frequently would say, "Is it my fault that the hair crossed my path?" So she felt, obviously a lot of the characters felt guilt and shame.
yes.
And I never felt that Prue really did, which is why I think she was like the best character in the story. I mean, obviously she's the narrator, but when they looked into their hearts, everyone else felt guilt for something, and Prue was just a very hopeful person.
She did feel shame about one thing.
What was it?
The raising
The what? The raising penis.
Yeah,
well, she wasn't super shameful of it either, though. Like I thought that was a really interesting moment where she was willing to do that in the first place.
Yeah, there's that, first of all. Then what I really liked about it was, actually we were talking about this in terms of writing today at another author talk, and it was about how you reinvent yourself and how you really, sometimes it feels like an ocean change when you have to pivot to something. And I feel like I was thinking of Prue when I was in there producing that interview, because I was like, she's so used to seeing herself as this timid person whose horizon is just right here. You know, she's staying in her house, she's staying with her family because she's not judged by them, and she can forget about any of her physical impairments. And how much must it have taken of an effort to change that viewpoint to someone seeing her, loving her, valuing her based on the hearsay of the people she knew, and picking her up on that horse. I loved how she saw these things before. It was so beautiful.
Yeah. I do think sometimes her hope and her positive attitude towards her cleft lip does waver from time to time. But ultimately, her view of herself is quite optimistic in comparison to what she's receiving from society, I think.
I'd agree with that.
And
all right,
I think
Margaret.
sorry.
Nope. I'm just moving on. Go ahead.
I think that's why we love Kester so much, is that he just sees past that, and he's intrigued by her as a person and other parts of her, her figure, for example.
Fairy. I don't know what an apple blow fairy is, but hey,
I don't know either, but it
must be good.
It sounded good, I guess.
Yeah,
but you're right. Like the cleft lip was people used it as one part of her to represent her whole identity. And what you're saying, I think, is that Kester saw her actual whole identity with the cleft lip as
and I don't just and I don't just mean her physical form. He also was interested in her mind as well.
Exactly.
And that's why he stands out so much to us, and I think why we love him so much, or one of the reasons why we love him so much in the book.
That dog scene, man. Oh my God.
Yeah. It was very intense.
What?
It was very intense.
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had two questions. One was about the light in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one was looking back. So often if I read a book and it's someone relating the events of their life, and they're like, and that was really terrible because what happened next made it really awful. And you're like, why are you, toggling back and forth between the now and the then? Mm-hmm. And it annoys me. But in this one, what happened was she was saying things like, and in view of what happened after, I'm glad she told me she loved me, or these sweet moments. And it feels tinged with pathos or wistfulness rather than a narrator trick, and it just felt like things were going to go a certain way, and it was giving me a clue as to that, but it wasn't annoying. It was more like a one of a piece with the painting of the landscape and the nature. Did you guys have any opinions on that? Those like time checks that you got?
Yeah, I forgot for most of the book that this was her looking back on her life, but I was thinking about at the very end, it just kind of, there's this wonderful scene that we're all very, very pleased with, and then it just stops and says, "This ends the story of Prue Sarn." But does it really? Because it started with something that happened after the end of this story. It started with her telling us about this story from another time. So, I think it's an interesting aspect to the book. The way I read it was that this ends her story, as in now everything is perfectly happy from now on, happily ever after, the end. And she just lives in bliss with Kester. No, what?
The other option is that Prudence Sarn is no more, and now it's Prudence Woodsius.
That is true. That is also very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that one better. I like that one better. That it starts with, yeah. No, that one's much better. And then it starts her life as Prue Woodsius, which is a different book, I guess, except it isn't.
Yeah. Happy book.
I also noticed, I've got only a few more minutes left before I have to go.
Oh, okay.
So to answer your question about the light in the house, right? I was trying to look back at that scene today. I couldn't find it. So I was just thinking, what do I remember about that scene? Because I remember them at night, they were passing the house that they were going to hopefully live in eventually. And it was not lived in at the moment, if I remember.
Correct.
Okay. And then, and they see what looks like to maybe someone carrying a lamp or a candle through different parts, and it stays in like one window for a while, and then it's snuffed out.
Yes, it goes back and forth, and then it goes out.
Right. Okay. So I was thinking about, what would a light in a house represents, kind of like the hope. It's the refuge. It's the safety, and that was their goal, right? And it's extinguished. So her hope, for me, that was foreshadowing. Her hope was very small and was burning because they were doing all this work and they were going back and forth with, challenges that they were having, reaching their goal. And then it went out. The light went out with Gideon sitting right next to her. So
her hope for that future died as she developed a new idea of what she wanted her future to be. That's beautiful. I really like that.
That his social ambitions, represented by the house, were not where she was going to find her happiness.
I like that.
Yeah.
I thought of a slightly different thing when you were saying a light and a house, because that made me think of like a soul, like the light in the attic, or like and so if it was Gideon's ambition that was embodied by the house, and it was light in the house, it was Gideon's striving and mad travail, and then it goes nowhere.
That's another good layer.
I like that one too. Yeah.
This is so spooky. There are such like spooky moments, but it's not, terror. It's just like, I love this book so much.
So I have my final thought on reading the book. So for me, because I saw so much being represented around the mirror on their land, I thought of the reflection. She's very self-reflective, which might be why she was able to write those time checks kind of that you were describing, because we know that she's good at reflecting. She writes in her journal and she writes those letters. So the water, obviously, like we said, reflects things that are happening outside the water. And I thought about like the moments when the characters kind of who kill themselves, spoiler, which you already mentioned, but when they do, the last thing that they see before entering the water is their reflection in the water. And that so they were being confronted with what they had become. And Prue stands out. She does not make that choice. She really likes the water. I mean, she describes it all the time, and looks to it, when she's kind of traveling from her home. She doesn't regret what she has become through the story. Her reflection does not make her feel guilty. And I think that's interesting because with the precious bane, that her brother had a precious bane, she had a precious bane, and she did something different with it. It didn't define her life. And I thought that was quite an empowering kind of lesson to learn from Prue Sarn or Prue Woodsieves or whoever she is now. Whoever she has become that she likes.
Yeah. I like that. Marissa, did you have a final thought? And then I'll wrap it up for us.
Yeah, no, I really like that final thought, to be honest. I think that the book in general ends up being a really powerful and empowering book, despite having, themes of the Gothic and some really just tragic things, that ultimately it manages to be hopeful, and that's something that makes it a little extra special to me.
Yeah, very cool. Well, there you go. I'm going to put spoiler in the description, but I will also put, we all want you to read this book, so read it and then come back. I think that's what I'll put in my little description box.
Yeah, and we should be sure to mention it on our channels with less spoilers to encourage people to read it, of course.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you guys both. I know we had to sort of squeeze this in between both of your schedules. So thank you so much for making the time and making the time to read, and, have a lovely weekend and rest and stay safe out there. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah.